Hey, what's up guys? This is Chad Hoku of HokuProps, and today on Airbrushing with HokuProps, we've got something kind of cool in store for you. This is going to be a time-lapse video showcasing the refinishing process of the orc statue that was given out last year for Blizzcon 2019's attendees. Our first step is to apply what's called a wash, and a wash is a pretty common practice. We're going to take any dark colored paint, typically a black or a brown, something in that kind of tone, and we're going to thin it out just a little bit, either using a paint thinner or even in some cases water. And then you're going to kind of liberally apply it to that surface. The benefit of thinning it out is that we're going to have a much wetter paint that doesn't dry as fast. And as you can see, what I'm going to do next after I've applied it is literally take a paper towel and just start removing as much of that as I really can off the surface. The goal really is to ensure that a lot of that paint that has kind of permeated into the recessed areas, so like, your cracks, your crevices, scratches, anything like that, you want that to stay there. But the surface, the area that really has most of the kind of friction or interaction with its surroundings would be actually cleaned off over time. That's just kind of a normal process. The paint that I prefer to use for this is by a company called Createx, and they've got a paint line called Auto Air Colors. They've also got another paint line called Wicked, and you're gonna hear me talk about them a lot throughout this entire airbrushing series. So they have a transparent jet black under their Auto Air Colors series, and it's really nice for this process because it's transparent, so it's far more forgiving. You can put much more on it by accident and be able to take it off and it not go just completely ruin the surface. The airbrush you see me using as well is the Badger Patriot 105 that you've also heard me mention in previous videos. It's the workhorse airbrush that's really good for pretty much just about everything, but it's not perfect for really anything. Throughout the video, you're going to notice that I'm using a paintbrush. The paintbrush is being used to make sure that that black paint wash is permeating into those cracks and crevices that it might not naturally soak up into. Here you can see I'm actually using a stainless steel wire brush. You might be afraid that this is a bit too aggressive, but the only reason that I chose to use this specifically is the figurine is vinyl. That means that there's really no paint on the surface of this. Instead, it's a far more durable surface because it's just pretty much solid plastic. So I can actually use the wire brush on the surface without worrying about damaging it too much. Another thing to mention is you see I'm using a little bit of 91% Isopropyl Alcohol. What's so cool about the Createx brand paints is they are soluble to alcohol. So if you notice that you get too much paint in one area, you can actually just take a little bit of alcohol on either a Q-tip or on a paper towel, and that will help assist taking that paint off that it might have built up too high in. The cool thing about it though is the alcohol will create almost this burnished surface effect with the paint if you don't aggressively take it off too much. And it will also still, in most cases, leave that residual paint in the recessed areas. So really in this case, I kind of encourage people to experiment with the paint, with the weathering effect that they're after, see how the alcohol affects it, see how the water affects it, see how the different tools and equipment affect it. And that's really what's going to help you play to your strengths and figure out how best to achieve the technique as well as the look that you're after. So it's at about this point that I'm starting to realize that I'm actually going to probably be unhappy with how that skin looks. It's very smooth because it's vinyl, and so I know that at one point I'm going to have to change the surface texture. I'll point out a little bit later on what I'm doing to address that problem, but at this stage I'm still only interested in accentuating all of the recessed areas with that wash. What you see me doing here is I've folded a paper towel a couple times and then I've saturated it with that isopropyl. And what I want to do is kind of aggressively remove the majority of that wash off of the surface that's going to have the most interaction with the environment, you know. So I'm constantly thinking when I'm weathering things, whether it's, you know, a figure like this or if I'm weathering a prop, I'm trying to think, how would this be affected by its environment normally? And I try to think this orc would be walking through dense shrubs and bushes, and all sorts of dirt and debris is going to just be hitting him. He's going to be fighting, so he's going to have a lot of scratches. And what's kind of interesting about that process is it naturally wears things, but it also naturally cleans them a bit to maximize the aesthetic, to kind of present how that process works naturally. Something I want to mention about using alcohol with the Createx paints is the alcohol in and of itself, it essentially reactivates the paint. It takes that dried paint and it turns it back into a liquid. And what's kind of interesting about this is you really have two options. You can move the paint to another area, or what you can do is, using an absorbent material, kind of like a paper towel or a Q-tip, you can remove that paint. And so when you see me using a paper towel or Q-tip, it's me trying to remove paint. When you see me using a brush, on the other hand, that's actually me trying to not necessarily remove that paint, but shift it around. Here you can see me doing some much more precise airbrushing. I'm going to go through and try to, you know, accentuate his shoulder muscle, his tricep, his bicep, his back muscles, things like that. And that's just to really emphasize the fact that he is this muscular brute of a creature who's, you know, ready for war. Now, the material I'm using here, this is Rub and Buff. It's a metallic paste. It was originally designed for things like your picture frames and whatnot. It's really cool stuff. And what it does with props, though, is it can be really effective for what is called a dry brushing technique. A dry brushing technique is when you take just a minimal amount of compound paint or material on your brush and you're trying to very, very gradually apply it to a surface. It's typically done to accentuate highlights. So it's really the inverse of a wash in a way. If you watch the way that I apply it, I'm gonna really try to make sure that I'm not necessarily just applying it to the surface areas, but the brush will actually be angled in a way where it's mostly applying it onto the edges. And with a bit of material being applied in between there. You can see a lot of the edges in this model already are starting to really pop. And that's the big thing, is we want to make sure the surface of whatever is that we're working on is truly, truly, truly offering as much dimensionality as possible. Now, you might have just noticed that I got some Rub and Buff actually on the surface of the armor, and I'm totally okay with that. You know, once again, I'm constantly thinking while I'm working on a piece like this, what might have happened to this in a real environment? What was the process that was used to actually create this piece of armor or this weapon? And so I visualize, the pauldrons, while there might be red on that center area, that's probably paint or it's probably enameling. And so if it's constantly, interacting in battle and war, the likelihood of you scratching that paint off is pretty great. And so I kind of approach it with the mentality is it's totally fine if it looks like the paint's been scuffed off, because that's what it would probably look like in real life. Or in this case, Warcraft life. Another thing that I would encourage you to do when working on any piece is to make sure that you're constantly moving around. You're not just working on one area, because once again, you have to really start concentrating more on the entire composition versus just the one section. This is something that I think is a pretty big mistake for a lot of people, really in a lot of things that they do, is while the details are very important oftentimes, if the overall result is mismatched or just kind of all over the place, it really detracts from the end effect or the end goal that you're after. So really what you're looking for is a healthy balance, and I find personally the best way to do that is to make sure that I am constantly trying to visualize the entire piece that I'm working on. And the best way to do that is, once again, to just constantly step back and take a look at everything that's going on. So I want to give you guys a heads up with a little problem I had with the airbrush. It was not a big issue at all, but I want to make sure you guys know what happened, so if it happens to you in the future, you know how to fix it. Right around now, it spat, you see right there. And what this is just some paint thinner or solvent had either separated or I hadn't mixed it enough. And so since it's thinner, I just was able to blow on it with some air to evaporate it. Luckily, the Patriot 105, it's a dual action airbrush, so you can paint or you can just have it spray air. Alright, I'm pretty excited to tell you guys about this paint. So this is Wicked Colors Detail Sepia. I'm using it on the orc's hands here to try and accentuate, once again, just the recessed areas. What's so cool about Sepia is the color itself mimics something that is really common on everything that we use in life, anything that's manufactured. For the most part, it has grease on it. So, even something brand new right off the showroom floor or right off the machining equipment, it ends up having grease on it. And so even on a perfectly finished piece, I tend to find myself using this paint, even if it's just a little bit, and that's because it mimics life. So this is the time when I can explain how I addressed my earlier concerns over the skin. So the best way that I could think of to add some surface texture to the skin was to actually literally physically add that surface texture. So I took this stainless steel brush and I just started trying to scuff the surface of this model or this figure while still trying to be cognizant of what the actual surface area might look like if he was real. So I was thinking for this skin area, you're gonna have a lot of overlapping creases or wrinkles in the skin, just the way our skin looks naturally. I assume that an orc's skin is a little bit more leather-like, so it's okay for it to be a bit smoother, but it's still gonna have a grain of sorts or the wrinkles. At this point, I've gotten 2 or 3 real layers of weathering or washes applied to the surface. And what I'm trying to do now is taking a Q-tip with that isopropyl alcohol on it. I'm actually trying to slightly blend some of the different layers that I have applied in different washes. I want to get the sepia to actually mix a little bit more with the black, so on and so forth. It gives a much better realistic aesthetic if it doesn't look like you just had a single layer of black put on and then a single layer of brown put on top of that. It doesn't really look natural, and that's what I'm trying to achieve here, is that more natural or realistic finished surface effect. You can see I also come back in countless times really throughout the process, reassessing whether or not I'm satisfied with the surface still. Case in point, like on his eyebrow ridges here, I feel like the surface, it's now too clean. I took too much off. And so I immediately responded by just reaching up with my finger and trying to smudge it, which I don't think really accomplished what I want. So you'll notice here I actually take more paint and I try to redo the process. And one other thing that you can and really should do is not just apply the paint and immediately wipe it off, but depending on how long you wait, you will have a either longer lasting effect or a shorter lasting effect as far as the paint curing. And so if I paint it on there and I let it dry considerably longer, there's inevitably going to be more paint left on that surface. So now that I've cleaned off a lot of the surface, I'm going back in there with some more sepia paint. And what I'm trying to do is create almost a graduated effect where I want the discoloration of that surface to gradually gradiate towards being more of a clean surface, and it's going to give you far more dimensionality and far more depth on the surface. This is something you really consider doing on your costume, regardless of whether it's got props or it's got weapons or even on, certain fabric elements. This is also when using transparent paint truly shines. You can see how that paint on his knuckles, for example, is less, it's discoloring his knuckles less than the indentation along the length of his finger. Once again, now that I've gone through and done all this discoloration though, I'm thinking, cool, he's dirty, he's gritty, he's grimy, but he was just in a battle, and so once again there's going to be parts where a blade either hit and scratched the surface of either his skin or his weapon, or he just ran through a bramble, or once again, you're gonna have surface scratches everywhere, and so it's important to make sure that you add those back. And then finally, I thought the base needed a little bit of help. So I just took a little bit of very residual rub and buff and just gave it this nice little patina or sheen. And this, guys, is the final result. I hope you enjoyed the process and I hope you learned a lot. If you liked the video, please hit the like and also make sure you hit the bell to subscribe. For any comments or any questions, please post them below. I want to answer your questions and help you the best I can. We here at HokuProps are hoping that you and your loved ones are safe at home. Take care, guys. Bye.